Surely, Frayne is right to remind the audience that while the play focuses on German efforts to build the bomb, the United States had its own highly organized and well-funded wartime bomb project in the desert of Nevada, and the collective work at Los Alamos produced two different kinds of bombs: Fat Man, a plutonium-based device, and Thin Man, a bomb based on the fissioning of uranium-235. And one of each kind was dropped on two cities in Japan, killing 10,000s of innocent people. What of the possibility that, whatever the nature of Heisenberg's intentions, his visit to Bohr in 1941 helped accelerate the US bomb project, resulting in the use of atomic weapons against the Japanese before the war's official end? Are things really so cut and dry that the dropping of atomic bombs on Japanese cities implicates Bohr while absolving Heisenberg? But Frayne doesn't raise the issue to help us confront these relevant historical facts and the moral concerns they raise. Rather, he uses it only to turn the tables so that we direct our moral outrage away from Heisenberg. Frayne doesn't directly endorse this conclusion, at least not in the play. In fact, he accuses audience members who leave with this impression of having made the embarrassing mistake of taking this faux conclusion seriously when he was obviously being ironic. Let's take a look at how Frayne says he accomplishes this ironic twist. Immediately following the foregoing exchange, where Bohr is held accountable for the deaths of 100,000 people, and Heisenberg is judged as innocent, Frayne has Heisenberg explain in an ironic passage that to judge people strictly in terms of observable quantities would constitute a new strange quantum ethics. Now, since the audience has been anticipating a new quantum-informed ethics all along, and the passage itself involves a rather subtle point about quantum physics, what's this talk about restricting considerations to observable quantities all of a sudden? It's perhaps not surprising that the irony has been lost on many a spectator, including some reviewers. In other words, the move that Frayne makes to distance himself from the conclusion he throws out as bait to a hungry audience filled with anticipation, a conclusion that fingers Bohr instead of Heisenberg, is this. Using irony, Frayne has Heisenberg question the application of a rather subtle aspect of his uncertainty principle, which is neither explained nor raised elsewhere in the play, to the situation of moral judgment. Here's the crucial exchange. Bohr. Heisenberg, I have to say, if people are to be measured strictly in terms of observable quantities, Heisenberg, then we should need a strange new quantum ethics. The physics point that Bohr begins to speak about is that Heisenberg, the historical figure, insisted, according to the positivist tenet, that one shouldn't presume anything about quantities that are not measurable. Indeed, that one should restrict all considerations to observable quantities. The way Frayne wields this point is this. If we follow the uncertainty principle, we would conclude that we shouldn't presume anything about intentions, since we can't know anything about them, and therefore, all we have to base our moral judgments on is our actions. This is what Frayne calls a strange new quantum ethics. And the cue we are given that this is not the conclusion we should walk away with is Heisenberg's lengthy homily on how, if we made judgments only on the basis of actions, then the SS men who didn't shoot him when he had the chance near the war would go to heaven. Presuming, of course, that this was the only moral decision that this particular devotee of Hitler faced during the long war. That's it. A bit too quick, perhaps? If Freyne had spelled out this key point more directly, he might have put it this way: we shouldn't rely on observables, that is, mere actions stripped of all intentions, to make moral judgments. Surely you didn't expect that Freyne would have us rely strictly on historical facts about what happened to sort things out. So where are we now? We can't judge people on either their intentions or their actions. Is there anything we can hold on to as the play ends and as we gather up our belongings to leave the theater? Freyne ends the play by presuming to help us take solace in the fact that uncertainty is not our undoing, but our savior. It is the very unknowability of intentions that is our principled inability to truly judge one another that saves our weary souls. This final conclusion, the real conclusion, harkens back to the earlier scene when Bohr turns around and helps Heisenberg to bring his unconscious intentions to light, with the apocalyptic result that Heisenberg does the calculation and Hitler winds up with atomic weapons. Better that we don't know. And so in the end, after a whirlwind of moral questions and uncertainties that surround, inhabit, and haunt the characters and the audience, we are left only with the slim and rather pat suggestion that the inherent uncertainty of the universe is our one salvation. All our moral searching is abruptly halted, frozen at a moment of time before Armageddon, and left as a mere shadow of itself, cast on the wall that denies us access to our own souls. We are left wandering aimlessly through a barren landscape with no markers, no compass, only an empty feeling that quantum theory is somehow at once a manifestation of the mystery that keeps us alive and a cruel joke that deprives us of life's meaning. Given the recent reinvigoration of nuclear weapon programs around the globe, the suggestion that the absence of a moral or ethical ground will inevitably, or could even possibly, forestall the apocalypse portended by the play's end fall flat, to say the least. But we follow the reasoning we've been offered into the despair of a moral wasteland laid bare by the explosion of absolute certainty. Is it true that quantum physics envelops us in a cloud of relativist reverie that mushrooms upward towards the heavens and outward, encompassing all the earth, leaving us with no remedy, no recourse, no signpost, no exit? I would argue, on the contrary, that quantum theory leads us out of the morass that takes absolutism and relativism to be the only two possibilities. But understanding how this is so requires a much more nuanced and careful reading of the physics and its philosophical implication than Freyne presents. I first review some of the main difficulties and then proceed to map out an alternative. As we have seen by Freyne's own admission, the parallel that he draws between physical and psychological uncertainties is limited and poorly specified. As with many such attempts to discern the implications of quantum mechanics on the basis of mere analogies, the alleged implications that are drawn, such as the reassertion that our knowledge of ourselves and of others is necessarily limited, ultimately do not depend in any deep way on understanding the lessons of quantum physics. Surely there is no reason to invoke the complexities of this theory to raise such a conjecture about the limits to human knowledge. Freud, for once, does not rely on quantum physics for his theory of the unconscious. It would have been one thing if, for example, we had been offered a more nuanced or revised understanding of the nature of intentionality or causality. But ultimately, it seems that such methods, intentionally or otherwise, are only out to garner the authority of science for some theory or proposition that someone wanted to advance anyway, and could have advanced without understanding anything at all about quantum physics. Of course, when the stakes are coming to Heisenberg's rescue, a clever use of the uncertainty principle is perhaps too much to resist. Another crucial point that I have yet to discuss is the fact that Freyne continually confuses the epistemological and ontological issues concerning the nature of knowledge and the nature of being. And yet, these are central elements in a heated debate between Bohr and Heisenberg concerning the correct interpretation of quantum physics, as I will explain. Before moving on to specify the nature of my own non-analogical approach, I want to explore this issue further, since it entails a key point that is crucial for any project that seeks to understand the wider implications of quantum physics. The fact that there are multiple competing interpretations of quantum mechanics. One point that is particularly relevant for Copenhagen and for my project is the fact that there are significant differences between the interpretations of Bohr and Heisenberg. Freyne raises this point in the play, but then proceeds to confuse the important differences between them. Quite unexpectedly, Freyne brings to light the little-known and seldom acknowledged, but crucial, historical fact that Heisenberg ultimately acquiesced to Bohr's point of view and made his concession clear in a postscript to the paper on his famous uncertainty principle. And yet, bizarrely, Freyne then proceeds to follow Heisenberg's self-acknowledged erroneous interpretation. It is not simply that this is yet one more source of tension between these two giants of the physics world. Rather, the point is that there are significant, indeed far-reaching, differences between their interpretations and their respective philosophical implications. The question of what implications follow from complementarity, not uncertainty, is a specter that haunts this play. Freyne inexplicably buries the difference without putting it to rest. Let's take a brief look at some of the crucial issues. In a key scene in the play, the audience learns about the intense disagreement between Bohr and Heisenberg concerning Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The nature of the difference between their views is not clearly laid out in the play, but it can be summarized as follows. For Bohr, what is at issue is not that we cannot know both the position and momentum of a particle simultaneously, as Heisenberg initially argued, but rather that particles do not have determinate values of position and momentum simultaneously. While Heisenberg's point that in measuring any of the characteristics of a particle, we necessarily disturb its pre-measurement values, so that the more we know about a particle's position, the less we will know about its momentum, and vice versa, seems at least believable. Bohr's point is utterly counterintuitive and unfamiliar. In essence, Bohr is making a point about the nature of reality, not merely our knowledge of it. What he is doing is calling into question an entire tradition in the history of Western metaphysics. The belief that the world is populated with individual things, with their own independent sets of determinate properties. The lesson that Bohr takes from quantum physics is very deep and profound. There aren't little things wandering aimlessly in the void that possess the complete set of properties that Newtonian physics assumes, e.g., position and momentum. Rather, there is something fundamental about the nature of measurement interactions such that, given a particular measuring apparatus, certain properties become determinate, while others are specifically excluded. Which properties become determinate is not governed by the desires or will of the experimenter, but rather by the specificity of the experimental apparatus. Thus, there is an important sense in which experiments can be said to be objective. Significantly, different quantities become determinate using different apparatuses, and it is not possible to have a situation in which all quantities will have definitive values at once. Some are always excluded. This makes for two complementary set of variables. For any given apparatus, those that are determinate are said to be complementary to those that are indeterminate, and vice versa. Complementary variables require different mutually exclusive apparatuses, e.g. one with fixed parts and one with movable parts, for their definition, and therefore these variables are reciprocally determinable. When one is well defined, the other can't be. I discuss these in detail in Chapter 3. Significantly, as Freyne points out, Heisenberg acquiesced to Bohr's interpretation. It is complementarity that is at issue, not uncertainty. With this important difference in mind, it's hard to resist the temptation to contemplate a new play, a rewriting of Freyne's Copenhagen using Bohr's complementarity principle rather than Heisenberg's uncertainty principle as a basis for analysis. I want to be clear that I am not suggesting that the difficulty with Freyne's play can be rectified by simply substituting one principle for the other and performing the same kind of analogical thought experiment to consider the moral and epistemological issues at hand. But I do want to briefly indulge in this exercise in a limited fashion, recognizing that there is no expectation of providing a rigorous analysis of the important issues at hand simply by making this shift. The point of the exercise is to get a sense of what a more careful consideration of quantum physics and its implications might bring to the surface. In this way, we can at least get some feel for what philosophical issues are raised and what concepts might need to be rethought if we take quantum physics seriously, even though this method may not help us to understand how the issues can be resolved and the relevant concepts reconceptualized. Let's return to the question of Heisenberg's intentions in visiting Bohr's in the autumn of 1941. Interestingly enough, there is already an important hint in Copenhagen that suggests how we might proceed if we want to take Bohr's complementarity principle as the basis for our analysis. We can zoom in on just the right passage by thinking of Margaret not merely as Bohr's wife, but as an integral part of Bohr. As Bohr says in reference to his partner, I was formed by nature to be mathematically curious entity, not one, but half of two. Margaret. Complementarity again? Yes? Bohr. Yes, yes. Margaret. I've typed it out of 10 enough. If you're doing something, you have to concentrate on you. I'm sorry, I'm going to redo that line. If you're doing something, you have to concentrate on, you can't also be thinking about doing it, and you're thinking about doing it, then you can't actually be doing it, yes? Ironically, Freyne draws the conclusion from this statement of complementarity by Margaret that doing something and thinking about what you're doing means that Heisenberg doesn't know why he came to Copenhagen in 1941. But in fact, it, or actually the relevant elaboration of the point, has quite different and much more far-reaching and profound implications. Freyne takes quite a leap here, and we would do well to go more slowly. Suppose that the activity that you're engaged in doing happens to be thinking. Then it follows, from Margaret's statements of complementarity, that what you are prohibited from doing is both thinking about something and thinking about it. That is, you can't both think about something and also reflect on your own thinking about the matter. That is because you need to make a choice between two complementary situations. Either you think about something, in which case that something is the object of your thoughts, or you examine your process of thinking about something, in which case your thoughts about what you are thinking about something, and not the something itself, are the objects of your thought.